Do you ever notice how in a group conversation, there's usually one person who barely says a word, and yet somehow, everyone keeps glancing at them? They're not loud. They're not trying to be funny. They're not fighting for attention, but when they finally speak, the room subtly shifts. People pause. Someone leans in and you think, why does that carry so much weight? Maybe you're that person, or maybe you've felt it. That strange respect certain quiet people seem to earn without asking for it. Not popularity, not charisma in the flashy sense. Respect. Here's the weird part. It's not accidental, and it's not about being shy, mysterious, or deep. There's a very real psychology behind why quiet people are often taken more seriously, sometimes even more than the loudest voice in the room. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's talk about what's really going on. Picture a meeting. Everyone's talking. Ideas are flying. Opinions overlap. Someone is explaining something they barely understand with full confidence. And then there's one person who hasn't said anything yet. They're just listening, watching, occasionally nodding, maybe scribbling something down. At first you don't notice them, then you start to. Psychologically, silence creates what's called informational tension. When someone doesn't immediately reveal their thoughts, our brains start to fill in the gaps. What are they thinking? Do they know something I don't? Are they judging this? Humans are uncomfortable with uncertainty, and silence is a form of uncertainty. So the quiet person unintentionally becomes a mental focal point, not because they demand attention, but because they withhold it. And when they finally speak, their words feel heavier, not louder. Heavier. If that sounds familiar, you might recognize the first type. There's the selective speaker. This is the person who doesn't talk to fill space. They talk to add value. They're not quiet because they're afraid. They're quiet because they're filtering. You'll see them in conversations where others ramble, repeat themselves, or think out loud. The selective speaker listens, processes, and waits. Then they say one sentence, and it somehow summarizes the entire discussion. Psychologically, this triggers something powerful: signal-to-noise ratio. When someone speaks less but says meaningful things, our brain tags them as high signal. And once that tag is set, every future word they say is treated as important, even before it's spoken. You might be this person if people often say, "That's a good point," right after you talk, even when you didn't think it was that special. It's not magic, it's contrast. Then there's another quiet type, and this one is often misunderstood. The observer. You know them. They're in the room, but they're not performing. They notice who interrupts whom. They notice who gets nervous when challenged. They notice the shift in tone when certain topics come up. They're quiet because they're absorbing. From a psychological perspective, this creates what's called perceived social intelligence. People subconsciously sense when someone is tracking more than just words, body language, timing, emotional undercurrents. And here's the twist. We tend to respect people who seem like they understand the room, even if they don't dominate it. The observer doesn't rush to react. They respond after they understand. Maybe you've experienced this. Someone asks for your opinion and you say, "I'm still thinking." That pause alone can elevate how people perceive you, because thinking is rare in a world addicted to reacting. Then there's a quieter, deeper type, the self-contained individual. This person doesn't need constant validation. They're not narrating their thoughts, they're not trying to prove they belong, and that's exactly why they're respected. Humans are incredibly sensitive to neediness, even subtle forms of it. When someone talks non-stop, over-explains, or jumps into every conversation, it can unconsciously signal, "I need to be seen." The self-contained person sends the opposite signal without trying. They seem internally anchored. Psychologically, this triggers status attribution. We tend to assume that people who don't chase attention already have it, or don't need it. And that assumption alone creates respect. Maybe you've noticed this in yourself. You're fine sitting in silence. You don't panic when there's a pause. You don't feel the urge to fill every gap with words. That calm does something to people. But not all quiet people are the same. And here's where it gets interesting. There's the delayed reactor. This person doesn't speak in the moment, not because they have nothing to say, but because their thoughts deepen over time. They might stay quiet during the conversation, and then message you later with an insight that hits uncomfortably close to home. Psychologically, this is tied to depth processing. Some minds work in layers. They don't produce instant reactions, they produce refined ones. And when people realize that, when they notice that your thoughts land harder later, They start to respect your internal process, even if it's quiet. This type often gets labeled as reserved or private. But beneath that is complexity. Now, let's talk about something important. Quiet people aren't respected because they're quiet. They're respected because of what their quietness signals. It signals thoughtfulness instead of impulsiveness, presence instead of performance, confidence without noise. And here's the part most people miss. Respect grows when words are intentional. Silence gives words boundaries. It frames them. In a loud world, restraint looks like power. So if you're quiet, and you've ever wondered whether that's a weakness, it's not. But it does come with a responsibility. When you speak, it matters more. People listen harder, and they remember. So here's the real question. Which one are you? The selective speaker, the observer, the self-contained, the delayed reactor, or maybe a mix? And how does that quiet show up in your life? At work, in relationships, in rooms where you used to think you didn't belong? If this resonated, sit with it for a moment. And if you want, share in the comments which type felt uncomfortably accurate. Because sometimes, the people who say the least understand the most.